I'm sitting here with the chair of the newly formed political party, the United States Humanist Party, and we're going to discuss real quick what exactly is plutocracy democracy.
Plutocracy democracy is our word. We invented it. You may think of it as Washington, the swamp, draining the swamp with what Donald Trump talks about, the stagnation that goes between political parties. But we call what's going on today in American politics plutocracy democracy. What is plutocracy democracy? Plutocracy democracy is a democracy of the wealthy, by the wealthy, and for the wealthy. Be a hijacking, and that's the key word, a hijacking of all branches of the United States government. So what are these branches? Well, you have the presidency. You have Congress, which is the House of Representatives and the Senate. You have the Supreme Court, and you have the Federal Reserve. Right now, plutocracy democracy has the presidency. Plutocracy democracy has hijacked the Senate. Plutocracy democracy has hijacked the Supreme Court. Plutocracy democracy has hijacked the Federal Reserve. And those are by far the biggest fish in the sea.
The commanding heights of political power.
To put it bluntly. In 2019, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4. What a shocking coincidence, right? 5-4. Green-lighting gerrymandering. Because they're going to go after the House, and they are going after the House. I think on the books here in 2021, there's within the states over 200 laws to suppress voting rights. So they're going hard to capture even the House of Representatives. Right now, as we speak, looking at the data, the House of Representatives stands alone against, plutocracy democracy, and they're doing everything that they can to capture the House of Representatives. So the key word in plutocracy democracy is hijacking, and that's precisely what James Madison feared the most, because you can have separation of powers. We do have separation of powers, but it doesn't work when one group hijacks all these separate branches. So the great Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis said it best, and I'm going to read this quote from the website. Experience should teach us to be most on guard to protect liberty when government's purposes are beneficent. Men born to freedom are naturally alert to repel invasion of their liberty by evil-minded rulers. The greatest dangers to liberty lurk in the insidious encroachment by men of zeal, well-meaning, but without understanding. So basically, that's what we're seeing today in Washington, D.C. Now, he said this in 1928 with the dissenting vote in the Olmstead versus United States, U.S. 479. So what we see in plutocracy democracy in our interpretation and what's going on in Washington is that American democracy isn't so much static, it's dynamic. To give you one example, in 1913, we could still appoint senators to the United States Senate in Washington, D.C. That was changed with the 17th Amendment. Now we vote for senators. So you see that even American democracy is dynamic. It's not static. Of course, it takes an amendment to do that. Franklin Delano Roosevelt served 4 terms. The 22nd Amendment changed all of that. Now you can only serve 2 terms. In January of 2010, Citizens United versus the Federal Elections Commission green-lighted unlimited money by corporations, giving corporations free speech, First Amendment protection rights.
Essentially giving them personhood.
Pretty much. And so that's what plutocracy democracy is. And if you were to want to know when this all began, it began January 20th, 1981, with the election of Ronald Reagan. This is when the hijacking officially kicked off. To put it best, their mantra was, government is not the solution to our problems. Government is the problem. And everybody just went, yay! You know, so if government is the problem and it's been dismantled and we now have neoliberalism, the invisible hand from neoliberalism pushing us along, you would think since 1981 we'd be better off. But the invisible hand from baby boomer neoliberalism resembles more the xenomorph from the movie Alien. You know,
Good one.
It's on the face of the millennials and pumping millennials, inseminating them with these over-the-counter derivatives, and you don't have a choice anymore.
You need a graphic. You need a graphic.
And it's gonna rip the hearts out of millennials and Generation Z, because that's really the invisible hand, is the xenomorph.
Indeed.
So when you look at plutocracy democracy, what's really going on here? So one of my heroes is Hannah Arendt, great German philosopher and humanist out of Germany, escaped Germany, Nazi Germany, Jewish woman who witnessed what was going on in the Weimar Republic in the 20s and the 30s. So basically, she saw how German democracy was undermined by the tools that were available to them in the Weimar Republic. So what are the legal weapons of plutocracy democracy? Well, the legal weapons of plutocracy democracy are Senate filibusters, gerrymandering, free speech First Amendment protection rights for corporations, dark money, super PACs, lobbying, regulatory capture. The 3 Ds, as we call it, which is deregulate, defund, and desupervise. Sometimes you don't have to deregulate, change the law, just don't enforce it. Give you an example, if you don't enforce speeding on the highways, what are people going to do? People are going to be driving 120, 130 miles an hour. You enforce that, you keep people under control by putting up speed traps, and nobody knows when it's going to happen, so you kind of drive 65, right? So in government, all you have to do is desupervise. Just don't enforce the rules that already exist.
Corporate America has gotten accustomed to all the benefits of not being supervised.
To say the least. And finally, of course, we have presidential emergency power and unconstitutional executive authority. And they push that envelope every chance that they get. So if we look at these straight down the list, let's briefly discuss the presidency. Executive authority, to you millennials and Generation Z, what stands in the way of give me liberty or give me death is simply 5 Supreme Court justices. Because if the president, who cannot call up the military against any protest that millennials and Generation Z may do, whether it be peaceful or not, doesn't have the right to call up the military, but the military can assist the police. And what a coincidence. The military and the police have interchangeable parts. I mean, what are the odds?
Same weaponry, essentially the same soldiers. As people leave the military, they go into law enforcement.
Pretty much. And this is not a knock on the military.
Not at all. Not at all.
Or the police department. It just is merely a scary fact that 5 Supreme Court justices could rule on behalf of the president over the Constitution of the United States. And if you don't believe that your God-given rights can be taken away, you need to ask the Japanese Americans during World War II about their God-given rights and how they were taken away, and the African Americans during the Civil Rights March of the 40s, 50s, and 60s, how their civil rights were taken away. So today in
Words
Washington,
don't always live up to their actions. Don't always live up to words.
Exactly. So in Washington today, we have the oldest Congress in American history. So America's not been around that long, but we have the oldest Congress in American history. We elected the oldest president in American history. Joe Biden, I believe, is 78 years of age, if I'm correct. I think Reagan became the oldest president, but he served 2 terms. But elected, Joe Biden is the oldest president. And this is a new record. Do you know which record they broke? The 2018 midterm elections. The 2018 Congress was the oldest American Congress of all time. So
We're
2020,
really going big these days.
the pendulum is going even farther towards the silent generation and the baby boomer generation. So that's not a good thing. That's not democracy. So basically what we have with the Senate has always been a place for the rich.
An anti-democratic institution, one might say.
Yes. And there's nothing really wrong with the interests of the rich being protected in the Senate. Democracy, for example, we are a republic, first and foremost. You wouldn't have people just democratically vote and say, yeah, we want to take all the rich people's money, and 90% of the people vote that way and then make it so. So that's the flaws in democracy. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing wrong with that. But according to OpenSecrets.org, it now costs a minimum of $30 million to win a Senate seat. And you see, within the Senate, to stop laws from being passed, all you need to do is filibuster them. So you don't need all 100 senators to be on your side. You just need a good chunk of them. You get 24 senators to obstruct democracy. You will obstruct democracy.
Obstruction is the right word. An entire generation is seeing every effort to improve and do the things that you're talking about just be filibustered and stopped, and we see that battle going on right now in Washington with Mr. Manchin and whatnot.
And during the World War II generation, there were many laws that were passed that crossed party lines. Today, that number is down to, relatively nil. And that's the stagnation in Washington. And that's primarily because of filibusters. And you can see the chart of filibusters in the United States Senate, just taking effect. And again, the average age of the Senate, I think, is 62.9 years of age. And of course, they're going to, not only are they the branch of the wealthy Americans, but they are the branch of the silent generation and baby boomers. So Millennials and Generation Z are up against, quite a battle.
Indeed. Just out of curiosity, of the filibusters used, how many of them do you know off the top of your head whether they were used more by which party over the other? Did more Republicans, have they used them, more Democrats? Has there been any study on this at all? I'm not aware of any, but.
Well, you can look at those numbers mm-hmm. and see, your question is directed towards who's the minority in the Senate. So the minority always does the most filibusters. But you're talking to the chair of the United States Humanist Party that believes that there is no difference between Democrats and Republicans. And again, I've seen these laws. I've seen, what one party stands for and what laws they passed in contradiction. And that goes for both the Democrats and the Republicans. And I had that on our website of those laws. But yes, it's true that the minority party in the Senate is the leading voice of the filibusters. But make no mistake that, they're all in cahoots.
Right.
No law is going to be passed that undermines plutocracy democracy or the wealthy. So, what laws would benefit millennials and Generation Z, those laws would only get passed if it also benefits plutocracy democracy.
Everybody out there should ask themselves in the last 20 or 30 years, what law has been passed that the people wanted, that the corporations and the plutocracy democracy people at the head of those power structures didn't want. They get their way pretty much universally, whereas anything else just gets shut down,
Well,
that's like the end result of this concentration of both financial wealth and political power in the hands of these plutarchs.
Exactly. The American oligarchs. Look at infrastructure. How does improving infrastructure benefit the rich? When you have your own private jet, are you really taking the subway?
You don't care about high-speed rail. That doesn't matter to you. And honestly, when that doesn't matter to you, you would rather spend your billions chasing things in outer space instead of creating decent water treatment plants for communities around the country.
Exactly. When you have your own distillery of water, you're not worried about public water systems. So that's one example. The infrastructure overhaul doesn't benefit the rich. The problems with student loans doesn't interest the rich. And that's what we call democracy by coincidence. Occasionally, laws get passed that do benefit Generation Z and millennials, but it's only because of coincidence that it also benefits plutocracy democracy. Well, exactly. I mean, take for account, 9/11, 2001. That benefited millennials and Generation Z, but it also benefited plutocracy democracy. So that's the only real thing that's happening at the present point, is that you see laws passed by coincidence, democracy by coincidence.
Not really a concerted effort to be a government of, for, by the people.
No. We haven't been that way for quite some time.
I think it's one of the hardest things to figure out when you're having these conversations is people always want to know, when did that start? When did this happen? You know what I'm saying? That's with such a interesting history as we have, that's sometimes a hard thing to completely unpack.
Exactly. So here's some statistics for you. The United States Senate has an average age of 62.9 years of age, oldest Senate ever. 80% of senators, 80% are of the baby boomer generations. There's not one millennial. 67% of the House of Representatives are baby boomers. Less than 10% are millennials.
Wow. Not exactly a representation of the people.
No, not at all.
And it's scary to think that these people have so much control over things that benefit us all. This is that generational theft you were talking about. They almost can't make the proper decisions.
Well, that's correct. Yeah. That's correct. So then, as I mentioned before, the House of Representatives, moving on to the House of Representatives, in 2019, the Supreme Court ruled 5-4, greenlighting legally gerrymandering. So now states have the legal means to redistrict representation out of the House of Representatives. And there's over 200 laws on the books, in state books, to limit voting rights. And that's all part of gerrymandering.
It seems to be a pretty sustained assault on the people's will to govern themselves.
It is.
And it appears to be intensifying in a time where you would think we have so much media out there. You'd think it would be talked about more, but I think a lot of times people feel powerless and helpless, you know. Hopefully with things coming to pass now, that'll change.
You would hope so, but I don't think any change is going to happen within the Democrat Party or the Republican Party. And the reason why is I just pulled it up on my website. It's called Dark Money. Now, Jane Mayer wrote a book on dark money, and I love the word that she came up with. It's a coctopus based off of the Koch brothers, K-O-C-H, coctopus of money. And
that's a very lovely term.
and they are hell-bent on taking over American politics. And this coctopus that Jane Mayer talks about had over $214 billion amongst themselves to play with. That's quite...
it's a big war chest.
that's some serious pocket change there, $214 billion. And to give you a little play off of dark money, since Citizens United in 2010, the 2020 election that we just had, $14.4 billion, B as in boy, $14.4 billion was spent in the 2020 election. So I guess they didn't need my $10.
Yeah, you know, it would appear that the old saying that countries aren't invaded anymore, they're purchased, it would appear that that would also apply to U.S. elections now. Basically, whoever spends the money wins.
Well, you're exactly right. In the 20th century, countries were invaded. In the 21st century, countries are no longer invaded, they're purchased. And if you don't believe me, you can look at Mongolia, the country between China and Russia. China's in there just mining the heck out of Mongolia and shipping everything back to China. And they didn't go in there with their tanks and their missiles and their airplanes and nuclear weapons. They just went in there and purchased Mongolia. So much so that we quip that Mongolia is now called Mine-golia because they're being mined. China is in Africa for the same reason, using soft power to buy politicians so they can go in there and purchase countries in Africa. And America's no different. I mean, it's different to us because we're Americans. You know, we don't want this to happen for obvious reasons. You know, we're Americans. But there are people willing to sell out America to foreign interests, and that's the danger of dark money. And there's nothing wrong with a world economy. I'm not against that. We're not against that. But if it comes at the expense of Americans, then yeah, I'm against that, you know. And that's what Millennials and Generation Z are witnessing, because it's coming at their expense. And that's an undermining of the republic. And they're using the tools of democracy to undermine the republic, as I mentioned earlier. So that's the biggest problem. So you're absolutely correct on that note. So there's one thing I would like to share specifically with Millennials and Generation Z. And this isn't talked about in the news much. It's the inheritance tax, the estate tax, the wealth that is passed on from one generation to another. If I can share with Millennials and Generation Z the golden rule, it's an ancient humanist proverb. He who has the gold makes the rules. Never forget that. He who has the gold makes the rules. Ancient humanist proverb. So who has the gold in the United States of America? Not literally, but the wealth is now passing on this wealth relatively tax-free. So what made the United States unique is the America of our forefathers did not have a national church, did not have a national aristocracy, did not have the problems that Europe had. So when this all began, it began under President Clinton, a Democrat, was exacerbated under President Bush, a Republican, went exponential with President Obama, a Democrat, and went even further north with President Trump, a Republican. So back when Clinton became president, the exemption tax for wealth being passed was only $600,000. And he wanted to raise that to $1 million by 2006. And he passed the Taxpayer Relief Act of 1997. So on our website, you can see that in 1997, the estate tax was $675,000. Excuse me. And the tax rate was 55%. That means you would not be taxed over that amount at 55%. In 2001, President Bush changed the estate exclusion tax to keep American farms in the family, is what he said. And he changed the exclusion tax from $675,000 to $2 million. And only amounts over that would be taxed at 45%, down from 55%. So what did Obama do? In 2013, President Obama, a Democrat, passed the American Taxpayer Relief Act of 2012. He changed the exclusion tax from Bush's $2 million to $5 million. And any estate worth more than that would now be taxed at only 40%, down from 45%. And not only did he do that, he did the generation skipping tax. So a wealthy family, instead of passing their wealth to their children, could pass their wealth to their grandchildren, skipping their children so they avoid tax that way. That's what the generation skipping tax is. That way the government lacks getting taxes twice, but only once, but it favors the wealthy. So then in 2017, with the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act by President Trump, he then doubled the exclusion tax to close to $12 million. So if your estate is worth $12 million or less, you pay no taxes in passing that on. So what this means for millennials is you are now witnessing the birth of American aristocracy, just like Europe has had for thousands of years, and the families in Europe that continue to have the wealth and the power. And as I mentioned before, the whole idea of our forefathers was that the United States would be a nation without hereditary nobility, no national church, and without royal authority. Well, Plutocracy Democracy is changing all of that.
I was about to say you provide a very clear roadmap, if you will, to the creation of dynastic wealth and how that's occurred over time, and how that dynastic wealth has really shaped and, like you said, kind of corrupted the republic.
In 16 years, in a short 16 years, from 2001 to 2017, from Bush to Trump, the estate exclusion tax has been changed to close to $12 million. That's an increase of 1,600%. I haven't seen an increase of 1,600% since Dogecoin.
Definitely not in our wages. Definitely not seeing it in the wages.
Do you own Dogecoin?
No, I don't. You have to forgive me. I wish I did.
Dogecoin has gone up like 4,000% or something like that, from zero to like whatever it is now, 30 cents. I don't know, but sorry, I had to throw that in.
No, you're good.
So 1,600% from the original 675,000 in 2001. So what does that mean today? Again, if your estate is worth less than $12 million, you won't be taxed. And anything over that, you would be only taxed at 40%, down from the original 55%. And this has been done.
Here again, this was done by both political parties,
by
red
Democrats
and
Republicans. And
even a real estate mogul himself. You know what I'm saying? A member of that. Drove it that high. Wow.
And this is going to be who controls Millennials and Generation Z moving forward. It's going to be the Millennials and Generation Z that inherit this wealth.
How do we mobilize to stop this, though, in a system that is so corrupt and ossified between two of the same party? How do we mobilize to change this in 2021?
Well, what would our forefathers want you to do? WWJD. You ever hear that? WWJD? What would Jefferson do? So, you need to ask yourself, WWJD, what would Jefferson do? Jefferson would say, get involved. There's no way you're going to change any of this. You can't look for the knight in shining armor to change this.
You're saying it takes each person getting involved.
Each person getting involved. Here's what Thomas Paine said about this inheritance tax and inheritance wealth. It's the difference between hereditary rights and the rights of man. The privileges of class versus the equality of all before the law. Our forefathers were vehemently against this. Vehemently against this. And this is all being changed by Plutocracy Democracy.
It's scary to see it being supported. The parties doing this, at least in some form, have the support of the people still.
Well, what news channel is reporting on this?
None.
MSNBC, CNN, Fox News. And it's a misnomer to call this the liberal media. It's corporate media. Mm-hmm. Corporate media would never want this discussed on any of those.
With their interests.
With their interests, because this corporate media are part of dark money. So this is, in a nutshell, what Plutocracy Democracy is. It's a hijacking of all branches of American government. They're going hard now after the House of Representatives. And the winners of this are going to be the children of these wealthy American oligarchs, Generation Z and Millennials. And remember Machiavelli's maxim, political power follows economic power.
Very true. No country ever stays strong militarily without political power, without economic power.
Exactly.
Very true. Very true. Very wise words. Well, it's good for people wanting to get involved in the Humanist Party. What can they look forward to seeing in the future?
Well, we're going to start movements in every state. We want to get humanists involved in every state.
Boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground.
Mobilize the people.
Spoken like a true military man. This guy was were you in Iraq?
Yes, sir.
This guy was in Iraq.
In my younger years.
He had hair then.
Yes. And then it all betrayed me. My hair follicles betray me.
But yes, boots on the ground.
Excellent.
We have to get people involved in every state. That's the main thing. I think there are enough people Generation Z, Millennials, Humanists to understand this. Go to the website, www.unitedstateshumanistparty.org. Everything's there. Everything that's on what we've been discussing is on the website and more. But it's your country, democracy is what we make of it. Let's make this country stand out. Let's be the true Lady Liberty, and live up to our proclamations, what Lady Liberty says, what we should do. So that's what we need to do.
Well, there you have it from the chair himself of the United States Humanist Party. You need to go to the website and go ahead and sign up, put boots on the ground, and get involved.
Thank you so much. I'm glad to be here.
Yes, sir. Have a good one.